Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube. Today, I have a very special topic for you that is kind of near and dear to my heart. We are going to be discussing a little bit of the differences between and also commonalities amongst both eating disorders and disordered eating, which, if you did not know, those are two different things. We'll dive deep into that today, and then we will also talk a little bit about the ways in which the treatment for either one may be a little bit different or similar depending on the situation. And then we'll also, of course, get into some resources for you all if you suspect that you or someone you love may be suffering from an eating disorder, or kind of some ways to tell the difference if you're not quite sure. So if you are new here, hello and welcome. My name is Erin. I am a registered dietitian. I have a private practice called New You Nutrition. We are based in Lexington, Kentucky, but we do service folks all over. I will link a link to my website that will give you kind of all different types of detailed programming in terms of if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, or I also offer lots of either free or paid for content that does not involve one-on-one coaching with me. So things like, master classes, workshops, courses, things of that nature, trying to reach everybody in addition, of course, to all of my free content, such as my YouTube, as well as all of my social media pages, which I offer, just free content for all of you. And it's particularly if you're new, but really for everyone. If you've been following with me for a while, you probably know this very well. But these topics are very near and dear to me because it is truly my mission to help people break the cycle of dieting. I know that the term diet is in my title, dietitian, but I am actually very against any diet with a name, right? To me, diet means what you eat every day, and there's really no moral kind of like right or wrong. It's more of kind of whatever your goals are for your health. There's a right for you. And then that may be totally different than what's right for someone else. So my goal is to get people out of this cycle of dieting and thinking that there's a right and a wrong by teaching them to nourish their bodies well, right? So there's just so much misinformation out there, unfortunately. And it can make it kind of like a really confusing place to navigate. It can make trying to figure out, what to do for your health. It can make it really confusing. So I am here to help you navigate all of that. It is absolutely my mission with my practice, as well as with all of my either, paid for or free content. But a big part of why that is so near and dear to my heart is that, and again, some of you may know this already, but I actually am in recovery from an eating disorder. So I was formally diagnosed with bulimia when I was about 25. So that was about 10 years ago now. But the reality was I probably suffered from that eating disorder, honestly, for probably close to 2 decades before I was ever diagnosed. I'll link my webpage and you can read my bio. But one of kind of the stories I always tell folks when they're first meeting with me is that, I remember distinctly when I got to kindergarten and we were sitting down crisscross applesauce, and I noticed that, the squish that comes up when your thigh and your calf muscles stick together. I noticed that mine was larger than some others because I just have thicker thighs. I always have. And that was, I was about 5 years old at that point. And that was kind of a point at which I just vividly remember. But I remember thinking, my thighs are larger, and somehow already, even at the age of 5 years old, knowing that that was somehow bad, right? And it's not bad. I want to be very, very clear on that. Thick thighs are not a bad thing at all. You will never hear that from me. But that's the narrative that diet culture teaches us. And that was something that I had already been aware of at such a young age. In other episodes of this podcast, I will often kind of go into some of like the reasons why that might be for me personally. It was, hearing my mom and the way she spoke about her body. But then also we're inundated with messaging, right? We're inundated with these messages that, especially as women, so especially if you are identify as a woman, or if you have been socialized for any portion of your life as a woman, I think this is particularly pertinent, but it affects men too. I think, and of course, if you are kind of somewhere on the spectrum of gender, that makes it even more fun, right? Because you don't quite fit into a box that society is trying to determine for you or define for you. So we kind of get a lot of these kind of dysmorphic bodily expectations that really are not realistic, nor are they healthy. So that's just kind of a little bit of my story. Like I said, I was diagnosed at 25, but I had been engaging in both disordered and full on eating disorder behaviors for probably at least a decade, if not more. Beyond that point, and we'll kind of get into, hopefully some of my story resonates with you all. I don't feel as though my story is super unique to me, and I say that because when I talk to all of my clients, most of their stories are very similar to mine. So that's kind of why I tell it, is to let you know that like you are not alone, but you are also not broken. There is nothing wrong with you or your body. It's, there may be changes that you want to make to it, and that is perfectly okay. I'm not sitting here telling you that you cannot make changes to your body, but you should want to make those changes for the right reasons, right? They should be because that's going to bring you joy and happiness and give you access to things that maybe you currently don't. And it also should be within the realm of possibility, right? If depending on what it is, there may be things that physically your body is not capable of doing. And while that may be heartbreaking in some ways, also acknowledging that reality is important too. So I cannot wait to dive into this. I'm so excited. And kind of the first place I wanted to start is to kind of discuss just a little bit about the difference between a true eating disorder and disordered eating. I think that honestly, a lot of times I see it in media and it drives me crazy. But even just kind of, sometimes socially and even in some like healthcare circles, I've heard those terms kind of used interchangeably, and they're actually very different. So I want to get real clear kind of upfront about the difference. So I'm going to start with disordered eating because that is far and away more common. So disordered eating is anything that strays from eating when you are hungry and stopping when you are full. So I know that sounds super simplistic, and there's a lot that goes into it. We'll get into it, but that is it, right? So like naturally as humans, we are biologically designed to eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full. Now, a lot of the way we live our lives socially right now does not always support that, right? So most of us at some point or another throughout our lifespan are going to stray from that, right? And that does not mean that, it's true, it's truly problematic, but the true definition, the honest definition of disordered eating is anything that strays from eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. Now, the reality of how this presents itself, right? So that can look like, skipping meals even though you're hungry because you're trying to lose weight, right? It can also look like overindulging to the point where you're overly stuffed when even though you're full, you're kind of not even necessarily binge eating, but you're just eating a really good meal, and you don't, even though you're full, you don't want to stop because it tastes good. Those kinds of things. Technically those things are disordered. Now that does not mean that they are problematic, so long as they are not happening all the time, right? Well, skipping meals is problematic, but if you are, let's say, you're in a meeting, right? And you're hungry and we've got, hunger cues out the wazoo, but you can't necessarily just like leave your meeting to go get something to eat just because you were hungry at that instance. You typically would wait until the meeting is over. Similarly, Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day or something like that, when you're eating foods that you don't necessarily always have access to, or that you don't get to eat all the time, you see people that you don't get to eat all the time, you're likely going to eat beyond that place of fullness. You also may know that you're going into a meeting and you won't be able to eat for several hours. Well, you may, even though you're not particularly hungry right before that meeting, you may choose to have something to eat just to kind of know that you're going to be held over through that meeting because you know that, like, it's normally lunchtime or whatever, and that's a time when you would normally eat. Those kinds of things, while they technically do meet the definition for disordered eating, those are more normal, right? Or even, let's say you eat something and maybe you're eating a little bit faster than normal and you kind of eat a little bit past that place of fullness, and then you kind of get back to your desk in the afternoon and you're kind of like, whew, I might have overdone it. Those are things that are pretty normal, right? They're technically, they don't fit within that intuitive eating definition of eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. But the reality is most of us don't live our lives to where we can realistically do that all the time. So those are some examples of things that are actually pretty normal, and that you don't really need to worry about. Where disordered eating can become problematic is what I described earlier. So that can be things like skipping meals intentionally, even though you're hungry, because you either don't want to eat because um, you don't want to gain weight, or if you're like tracking calories and things like that. And, even though you're hungry, you've already hit your calories for the day. So you skip a meal or skip a snack or eat less than you really want to. Those things are problematic. Eating to the point of beyond fullness on a regular basis, right? So holidays, birthdays, even just kind of like random special occasions, those are kind of one thing. But if it is something that is happening on a fairly regular basis, especially if it's tied to like an emotion, so let's say, like stress eating is one example. Binge eating is kind of another example, where, let's say you on your current diet, right? You don't allow yourself to eat pizza. So whenever you do see pizza, you go all out on that pizza and you eat yourself until you're really stuffed. That's disordered, right? That's not normal. And to an extent, some of this is going to happen. And most people have experienced this at some point in time, right? What separates those types of, whoops, knocking my microphone here. What separates those types of behaviors from true disorders is a couple of things, right? And before I get into this, I want to also clarify that I am not a medical health professional. I cannot diagnose. What I can tell you is what is written in the DSM-5, which is what the behavioral health specialist will use as like diagnostic criteria, and also kind of what is kind of generally considered in literature and articles that I have read. So kind of what is documented as kind of being the difference between the two. That said, if you are hearing any of this and it is resonating with you, or you have questions or you're unsure, I 1000% recommend speaking with, maybe your primary care doctor is kind of your first line of defense, but also speaking with someone who is trained in behavioral health counseling. And then a dietitian, we'll talk a little bit about this at the end, can also be like a helpful support person to have in the treatment of an eating disorder. But the dietitian is never going to be the diagnosing counterpart. They can tell you, hey, I think you have an eating disorder, you should go see someone, but they can't diagnose it themselves. Nor can I. I'm just and none of this is meant to be diagnostic. It is more to kind of highlight some key points in the differences. But if any of this is kind of ringing alarm bells for you or someone that you know and love, certainly reach out to a healthcare professional. You're more than welcome to reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction as well. But just know that I can't diagnose that, nor can any dietitian, unless they also have a clinical psychology type of license. So kind of we have these disordered eating patterns that occur when, for a variety of reasons, we may not necessarily be eating when we're hungry and stopping when we're full, right? And that's just kind of disordered. What separates that from a true eating disorder is honestly, in a lot of ways, just kind of the frequency, and really kind of the impact that those behaviors have on your overall life. So it's kind of like, and the analogy I like to think of it is somebody who is kind of like a social drinker versus somebody who is an alcoholic, right? Most of us enjoy, alcoholic, or at least if we're adults, we enjoy alcoholic beverages on occasion. There may be times in our lives when we have perhaps had a little bit of overindulgence in those in those types of beverages. Again, holidays, birthdays, things like that, maybe some of those times. But by and large, we feel kind of, a very casual recreational relationship with alcohol, to where it's like, yeah, there's no really evidence that alcohol is good for you, but it's just part of our social life, and it's not really a problem, versus someone who truly cannot stop. Um, and it's, the interesting, and it's really interesting because a lot of the treatment for eating disorders is actually very much echoes treatment for addiction related diseases and substance use disorders. So, and it's very interesting because it's kind of one of those things where it's a slippery slope, right? So I'll continue with the alcohol analogy and then kind of talk about how eating disorders play into that. So with alcohol, right, we know that like the more you use alcohol, the heavier you use alcohol, and especially if you use alcohol as like kind of a way of avoiding emotions, that those three things are going to set you up to be more likely to become dependent on that alcohol. That said, it doesn't happen in everyone. There are people who go through periods of life of very heavy alcohol use and then are able to stop or back off or what have you. Whereas there are other people that for whatever reason, it just kind of trips a switch, and those people really truly cannot stop. And what we haven't identified the genetic factors in that yet, but kind of the going theory at this particular moment anyway, is that there are likely genetic factors that kind of make certain people more susceptible to that alcoholism or whatever kind of, social, or I'm sorry, substance use disorder you want to pick, but kind of make people more susceptible to that true addiction as opposed to just heavy use. And disordered eating and eating disorders are very similar. So I think sometimes people want to like separate them of like, oh, well, I don't have an eating disorder. And it's like, well, maybe, but maybe you just don't have one yet, right? So like I said, with my personal experience, and I work with tons of clients who have eating disorders. I want to make that clear. Even though I cannot diagnose them, that does not mean I cannot treat them. And I'm very familiar with the treatment of eating disorders. I always work with a mental health or behavioral health specialist as well. And that's, likely to be the picking of the patient themselves. But it's a two-pronged approach, right? So, and I, as I mentioned with my own experience and most of my patients' experience as well, is that, these restrictions and these behaviors started over here in this disordered eating pattern, right? It started with, well, I'm just going to skip breakfast today because I want to lose a couple of pounds, to, eating 800 calories a day, purging with exercise by exercising, 4 hours a day. And, basically my hair is falling out, my bones are breaking, because my body was so nutritionally depleted. So kind of, it's kind of a sliding scale, right? And kind of what pushes that scale along from kind of these natural kind of, okay, like, I'm in a meeting, I can't break for lunch right now, types of, disordered behaviors, to, something much more severe is diet culture is that driver, right? And I will live and die on this hill, right? Is that diet culture is what is kind of that accelerant. And again, all of us live in a diet culture society, and I'll get back to what exactly that means in just a second. But we all live in this kind of diet culture, at least in Western society, we live in a very diet culture heavy society. And we all kind of also have this like capitalist society where, we're not always physically able to honor those hunger and satiety cues the way we would like to. So we're all like kind of, victims of the same environment. But that said, not everybody develops a true eating disorder. And the likelihood is that it's very much is similar to substance use disorders, in that there probably are genetic components to it. There may be also other kind of behavioral health components. And again, I'm not a behavioral health specialist, but I'm sure as anyone who does specialize in behavioral health can tell you that there's probably other kind of key identifiers that maybe make somebody more likely to develop an eating disorder. So just because you do experience some of these disordered eating patterns does not mean that you are at risk for an eating disorder, but it's a slippery slope for a lot of folks. And it's honestly a lot more common than people think. So kind of, getting back to kind of what characterizes a true eating disorder. And that is, kind of obsessive thoughts about food or your body, severe either restrictions, and really not even just restrictions, but like rules around food. It almost kind of can resemble like obsessive compulsive disorder sometimes. So it's not even just like you're necessarily restricting foods or food groups, but you can also be like restricting times that you eat or how long you go in between meals. You can also be very obsessive about like how your meals are prepared or what ingredients go into your meals that, kind of don't really have a scientific basis that you try to justify them with. Um, and then kind of another thing is that like it really interferes with your daily life, right? Like you are at the point where you are probably not going out to eat with friends, or you experience extreme anxiety about eating food that you did not prepare. Even if you're going to like a friend's house for dinner or a restaurant or things where you can make special requests, it's just kind of, that control factor is not there. And that's really stressful for you. It also, like I said, in my case, like my hair was falling out, I was overtraining, I was overrunning, and my bones were breaking down because I didn't have enough nutrition. So it definitely can affect your physical health as well. Weight loss or weight gain are actually really common. I think that's actually a big misconception, is that when we think of an eating disorder, we tend to think of what kind of the poster child of eating disorders, anorexia, which is where you're severely restricting and you're severely underweight. But there's a whole gamut of other eating disorders. And if you guys want more information on that, I'm happy to provide it. Um, but again, that's kind of not the purpose of this podcast. But um there's most people with an eating disorder are actually of normal weight, in some cases even overweight. But you can be, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, you can absolutely be overweight, and I'll put that in quotation marks just because how we define overweight or even obesity is based on the BMI scale, which is trash. You can go back to my other episodes as to why that is, but you can be considered or labeled as overweight or obese and still be malnourished, right? The two are not the same. Overweight has to do with where your BMI falls on a scale. That is trash, but the idea is that you're carrying excess body fat. But that does not mean that your body is not malnourished, right? So malnourished means that you're getting enough calories, but you're also getting enough micronutrients, so vitamins, minerals, fiber, things like that. It is very, very, very common. I think like 98% of people who are diagnosed with an eating disorder also have some type of diagnosed gastrointestinal disorder. So that can be a lot of things, right? Like that can be like IBS, it can be bloating, constipation, diarrhea, which makes sense, right? Like if you are not eating in consistent ways, or if you are restricting like whole food groups and things like that, it makes sense that like your digestive tract that is used to functioning with kind of a steady input of food, whereas now you're either restricting or like you're binge restrict, that's really hard on your digestive system. It's going from one extreme to the other, or it's just living in an extreme, but your digestive system's not designed to do that. So it's very common for digestive disorders to pop up as a result of an eating disorder. And then kind of the other key point, so we've got, it's obsessive thoughts about food, your body, either severe restriction or restriction that leads to binging. Most binging behaviors do come as a result of restriction to some extent. There may be purging type of behaviors as well. So that can be, of course, vomiting, but it can also be things like excess exercise, things like that. And then, all of this is interfering with your daily life. And I think probably the biggest take home is that you're engaging in multiple behaviors, right? So it's very rare for somebody to, exhibit just one of any of those things that I just listed. It is more often than not more than one. And again, I can kind of link some articles and resources for you all as to kind of what the diagnostic criteria is for an eating disorder. But ultimately, that is going to be the job of potentially like a primary care physician, but more likely a mental health professional. So, but as you can see, kind of these things definitely feed right into each other, right? So we have, this disordered eating pattern where like maybe we're ignoring hunger or we're restricting kind of certain types of foods, but then we binge on them when we get them. So we're not honoring our normal hunger and satiety cues. It can be a very slippery slope into kind of this obsessive land of eating disorders. Um, and again, like I said, that accelerant is diet culture, right? So that's what tends to accelerate it for most folks. Like I said, people who tend to develop eating disorders, there probably is something somewhat special about those people that makes them more prone to it. But diet culture definitely doesn't help. And what diet culture is, if you're not familiar, it is basically a system of beliefs that values thinness over health. Again, I'm going to say that again because I think it's kind of counterintuitive. People are like, wait, what? And that's the problem, right? Is that diet culture is a system of beliefs that values thinness over health. Um, and I think to a lot of people, they're like, well, wait, aren't thin bodies healthy bodies? They can be, but it's not necessarily the case. And that is the lie that diet culture has told us all, right? Is that thin bodies are more beautiful, thin bodies are healthier, thin bodies are more worthy, etc. Right? Like you have to be thin to get a partner, you have to be thin to be considered healthy. And we've really over the last couple of decades learned that that's not true at all. Like I said, the BMI scale is absolute garbage. And most healthcare providers know that. We just haven't changed the system. And some of us are out here throwing a stink about it. Other people are just kind of like, well, we've used it forever, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that the size of your body is really not a good indicator of whether or not it's healthy. So that from a medical science perspective, you can kind of take that one to the bank. Now, when it comes to things like thin bodies being more desirable or portrayed as the image of beauty or are being more worthy, that's a lot of societal level unpacking that we need to do as a group. It's not a simple fix to take the BMI calculator out of medical charts, but it's an even more complicated process to try to change the way we look at bodies and beauty. But again, diet culture and the diet industry, right? Diet industry is people who benefit from this narrative that thinness is in some way better or healthier. And they sell all kinds of products. They sell all kinds of diets. They sell all kinds of supplements. They sell all kinds of workout plans, basically trying to get you to shrink your body. And what can happen is that can go awry in some people. It's just kind of, it becomes obsessive that all you're trying to do is shrink your body. And it's sad because frankly, most of my clients, whether or not they are truly suffering from an eating disorder, have been trying to shrink their body for decades. And like I said, I was diagnosed with bulimia when I was 25, but I remembered being 5 years old and knowing that my body was larger than other people's, and also having the notion that that was not good. And it comes from a lot of really seemingly subtle messaging, but it's really troublesome. So I think it's just kind of, it's important to kind of acknowledge these things. And of course, like I said, if you are, concerned that you are dealing with kind of some disordered eating or are worried about a full-blown eating disorder, disordered eating is actually very common. And to an extent, it's normal in the sense that like all of us are going to experience it at some point in time. Like I said, actually, as I'm recording this podcast now, like my stomach is starting to rumble. I'm hungry. I'm not going to just stop talking to you all, right? So, but that's different from me saying like, I don't need to have lunch today. That's a very different internal conversation. But I think, a lot of where I personally come in kind of this conversation is breaking that narrative, definitely breaking the narrative, one, that thinness has anything to do with your health. It does not, right? And even your goal may still be to shrink your body for other reasons, but just improve your fitness, like whatever the case may be. but we don't necessarily need to shrink it because that's shrinking it automatically guarantees health. It does not. And especially in the case of eating disorders, it is actually much scarier to be at a low BMI and to be underweight than it is to be overweight. The types of complications that come with that are actually much more severe and usually life-threatening, which is why so many eating disorder patients are hospitalized. That's another really big reality, is that I don't think people realize like how hard the recovery is from an eating disorder. I personally was not hospitalized, but most of my patients who have been through eating disorder treatment are at very minimum in a residential treatment facility. Many of them are hospitalized before they get there. So I mean, it's serious and it's deadly. And I don't think that people think, oh, like it's, just an eating disorder, like you can recover from that. Like it's hard. And it's also, as much as it mirrors addiction, right? You don't need alcohol or cocaine or heroin to ever be a part of your life ever again, right? Those are things that, while it's hard to avoid them, I'm not discounting that. You don't have to face them for the rest of your life. Whereas as someone who's suffered from an eating disorder, you are coming back from obsessing over something your body actually needs to survive. So it's a very, very hard battle. And to that end, preventing it in the first place is is where I would like to start. So even in people who have not suffered from a true eating disorder, like I said, most of them have been trying to shrink their bodies for most of their lives. And breaking that mentality can take a lot of unpacking. I do it with breaking down the science, right? That smallness does not guarantee you health. But also, separating fact from fiction in terms of various diet culture lies, like, things like carbs make you fat. So that's a lie, to be clear. Carbs do not make you fat. Your body actually needs them. And kind of, breaking down like what you really should be doing to maintain optimal health regardless of what your size is. And so that's kind of where my role comes in, and we do a lot of coaching and a lot of unpacking about kind of why either shrinking your body has been important to you and what you realistically want to achieve by doing it. Because a lot of times the things that you want from shrinking your body, so things like confidence, things like a romantic partner, things like physical fitness, or being perceived a certain way by society, like those things a lot of times actually have nothing to do with the size of your body. You've roped all of that into the size of your body because that's what everybody has told you your whole life is wrong with you. But the reality is, even if you don't love yourself now, if you are not confident in yourself now, if you are not ready for a romantic partner now, you're not going to be in a smaller body. You're just going to be in a smaller body, right? So a lot of times it's kind of really digging deep into that kind of hot mess of what all is going on, and figuring it out. And again, a lot of times it comes partly with me to help with the nutrition things, but also a mental health provider as well. Um, that said, I do, of course, have some resources for you all. So if any of this has resonated true, if you are a book reader, I highly, highly recommend reading Body Respect by Christy Harrison. It is a wonderful deep dive into the world of how diet culture has lied to us all in terms of health. She breaks it down very, very scientifically, which I think is great for people who, like me, are kind of like analytically minded. It's just giving you the facts. Another great book is the Intuitive Eating book. That is kind of talking more about intuitive eating and kind of how to follow kind of some of this, how our bodies are designed to eat. There is also a workbook that comes with the Intuitive Eating book. I'm sorry, it's a separate book. It's an Intuitive Eating workbook, but it's written by the same authors. It is Evelyn Triboli and Elsie Reich. And it's just kind of like daily activities, like 10-15 minutes each, to kind of get you into kind of the practice of intuitive eating rather than just reading a book about it. So again, both are very scientific, very well done. For some people, the intuitive eating can feel a little out of grasp at first, but sometimes reading the book about it and kind of, again, just looking at the science, looking at the data can be really helpful. And then there's also Body Positive, which is another workbook that's kind of more focused on, rather than being focused on the nutrition or the intuitive eating side of things, it's more focused on the body image healing type of work. So those are some books I would recommend, and I'll link all of these when we post in the show notes. But and then if you are someone who is more into podcasts, obviously you have mine, that is wonderful. But just kind of some other folks that I absolutely love as well. Nourishing Women, which is Victoria Myers, who she owns a private practice that is based on just intuitive eating principles. So if it's something that, you look into some of the books or the workbook about it and you're more interested in it, her practice may be a good fit for you as well. She is all about kind of, finding food freedom, body positivity, body peace, that kind of thing. So she does have a podcast called Nourishing Women, and it's wonderful. But you can also, find all of her. I'll link her social media and stuff here too. She has a private practice that focuses on a lot of this stuff as well. Another really good one is called Maintenance Phase. That is Audrey Gordon and Michael Hobbs. They're more of a, it's a very comical podcast. I will say that I truly enjoy it. They break down different diets, but they also kind of point at the ridiculousness of them. So it's entertaining to say the least, but also not necessarily like supportive. But I love it. It's absolutely great. And then another one is called Unfuck Your Brain by Cara Lowenthal. She is more of kind of thought work in terms of kind of how to make your thoughts mirror kind of what you want for your life and your intentions for your life. She does speak a lot about diet culture. She is a coach who kind of she started out as a lawyer and then kind of evolved into coaching through her own like weight lost journey. But she basically kind of found like this thought work along the way, and it's truly transformational. So not all of her stuff has to do with body image or food per se, but it is a very empowering podcast to listen to. So those are some of my resources, and then of course I'll link all of my social media. It's obviously going to be always very body positive, weight inclusive, food neutral type of practice. So I'll be happy to link any of that information for you all as well. But hopefully you found this helpful in kind of discerning the differences between disordered eating and a true eating disorder. Again, some of us are going to experience disordered eating at various points in time, but that does not mean that there's not room to improve that. And, even if you're not at risk for a true eating disorder, if you're looking to improve your relationship with food, if you are looking to improve your relationship with your body, and if you're looking for somebody to help you just discover, sift through the bullshit really, and kind of discover what is real and true about nutrition and how it affects your body, then give me a shout. I would love to work with you. On all of my social media pages, there's a link in my bio that goes to how you can book a discovery call with me. All of my contact information is on there. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. So that is all I have for you all today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever it holds in store for you. And I will talk with you next time.